Deeper. Please, I can't take it anymore. The black American soldier froze when Japanese girl said and did the unthinkable. August 14th, 1945. Okinawa, Japanese-occupied territory. The rain hammered the tin roof of the makeshift detention compound like machine gun fire, a sound Sergeant Ezra Johnson had grown to hate during 3 years of island warfare. He stood at the entrance of the wire enclosure, his Springfield rifle slung across his shoulder, watching steam rise from the mud-slicked ground as the Pacific sun broke through the storm clouds. 27 Japanese women sat in rows inside the compound, their heads bowed, their prison uniforms soaked through. Enemy civilians. That's what the briefing officer had called them. Ezra had been told to guard them until transport arrived to relocate them to a permanent facility. 3 days, maybe 4. Simple duty after months of combat that had turned the island into a graveyard. Ezra's hands trembled slightly as he lit a cigarette. Not from fear. The shaking had started after Iwo Jima, after he'd watched his best friend Jimmy Henderson step on a mine that scattered him across 20 feet of black sand. The medics said it was battle fatigue. Ezra called it by its real name, the price of survival. He studied the women through the fence. They looked nothing like the propaganda posters back home, the ones showing fanged monsters in Japanese uniforms. These were mothers, daughters, teachers, thin, exhausted, defeated, but still the enemy. Still the people whose soldiers had tortured American prisoners, whose kamikaze pilots had crashed into American ships, whose empire had dragged the world into hell. A young woman near the front raised her eyes and met his gaze. She couldn't have been more than 25. Her face was gaunt, her cheekbones sharp beneath skin darkened by sun and deprivation. But her eyes held something Ezra hadn't expected to see. Not hatred, not fear, something else entirely. Recognition, maybe. The look of one survivor studying another. Ezra turned away and crushed his cigarette under his boot. Behind him, Sergeant Tom Williamson approached, carrying 2 canteens. Williamson was from Ohio, a farm boy who'd volunteered after Pearl Harbor. He'd fought beside Ezra since Guadalcanal, saved his life twice, and never once treated him different for being colored. In the segregated army of 1945, that counted for something. Water detail, Williamson said, holding up the canteens. Lieutenant Carter wants us to make sure they're hydrated. Geneva Convention and all that. Ezra took 1 canteen without comment. The Geneva Convention. A piece of paper written by men who'd never crouched in a foxhole while mortars rained down, never pulled a bayonet from a friend's chest, never watched whole companies disappear in artillery barrages. The Japanese hadn't worried much about the Geneva Convention at Bataan. 76,000 American and Filipino prisoners forced on a death march, 15,000 dead from starvation, disease, and execution. But orders were orders. Ezra unlocked the gate and stepped into the compound. The women shifted nervously, drawing back as if he carried plague. He understood that reaction. He'd seen what some soldiers did to enemy prisoners when officers weren't watching. He'd seen worse things done by the enemy. He approached the first row and held out the canteen. An elderly woman with silver hair reached for it with shaking hands. She drank deeply, water spilling down her chin, then passed it to the woman beside her. The young woman who'd met his gaze earlier was in the second row. When he offered her the canteen, she took it carefully, her fingers brushing his for just a moment. She whispered something in Japanese, 2 words he didn't understand, then bowed her head. Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today. Now back to the story. Don't mention it, Ezra muttered, though he knew she couldn't understand English any better than he understood Japanese. He finished the water rounds and locked the gate behind him. 3 days, maybe 4. Then they'd be someone else's problem. He could handle that. What Ezra didn't know, standing there in the August heat with rain still dripping from the roof, was that everything he believed about duty, about the enemy, about himself, was about to shatter like glass under a rifle butt. The young woman's name was Aiko Tanaka, and she was about to change his life. August 15th, 1945, 0600 hours. The sun rose over Okinawa like a copper coin dropped in blood-red water, casting long shadows across the detention compound where Ezra had spent another sleepless night on guard duty. His eyes burned from exhaustion and cigarette smoke. His back ached from sleeping on the wooden bench outside the wire. But sleep meant dreams, and dreams meant Iwo Jima, so he'd learned to stay awake. Lieutenant Carter arrived at dawn with news that changed everything. The war was over. Japan had surrendered. The radio announcement had come through at midnight, but Carter had waited until morning to tell the men. Emperor Hirohito himself had spoken to his people, accepting the Allied terms. After 4 years of brutal fighting across the Pacific, it was finished. Ezra felt nothing. No joy, no relief, just the same hollow numbness that had lived in his chest since Henderson died. Around him, other soldiers cheered and embraced. Williamson actually cried, great heaving sobs of relief. But Ezra just stood there, watching the women in the compound, wondering if they knew yet that their empire had fallen. By mid-morning, the celebration had faded into the grim reality of occupation duty. The women still needed guarding. The war might be over, but these were still enemy nationals. Protocol still applied. Carter assembled the guards and reminded them that the Geneva Convention mattered more now than ever. The world was watching how America treated the defeated. "These women are under our protection," Carter said, his voice firm. "Any man who forgets that answers to me. Understood?" The men nodded. Most meant it. A few, Ezra noticed, looked away. The incident happened at noon. Private Danny Thompson, a kid from Georgia who'd arrived 3 weeks earlier, was on gate duty when one of the Japanese women approached him. She was middle-aged, maybe 40, and she was pleading in broken English, gesturing toward the latrine area. Ezra, standing 50 feet away, couldn't hear the words but understood the situation. The woman needed medical attention. Feminine troubles, most likely. Thompson's face flushed red with embarrassment and anger. "Get back," Thompson shouted, raising his rifle. "Get the hell back." The woman persisted, desperation overcoming fear. She grabbed Thompson's sleeve. He shoved her hard. She fell backward into the mud, crying out as she landed. That's when Aiko Tanaka stepped forward. She moved between Thompson and the fallen woman, her hands raised, her voice calm but urgent. She spoke in Japanese, then switched to halting English. "Please, she is sick. Please, help." Thompson leveled his rifle at her chest. "I said get back, you Jap bitch." Ezra was moving before he realized it, his body operating on instinct honed by 3 years of keeping his squad alive. He crossed the distance in seconds and grabbed Thompson's rifle barrel, pushing it toward the ground. "Stand down, Private." Thompson's eyes were wild. "She touched me. Did you see? She put her goddamn hands on me." "I saw a sick woman asking for help," Ezra said quietly. "Now stand down before Lieutenant Carter sees you pointing a weapon at an unarmed prisoner." Thompson backed away, muttering curses. Ezra turned to Aiko, who was helping the fallen woman to her feet. Up close he could see that Aiko's hands were trembling, her breathing rapid. But she hadn't run. She'd stepped between Thompson's rifle and another human being. "You okay?" Ezra asked, knowing she probably couldn't understand. Aiko looked at him, those same eyes from yesterday, seeing through him somehow. She nodded once, then helped the other woman toward the latrine area. But before she turned away, she spoke again in that careful, broken English. "Thank you for stopping." 3 words, simple words, but they hit Ezra like artillery fire. She spoke English, at least some, which meant she'd understood every curse, every slur, every hate. Deeper. "Please, I can't take it anymore." The black American soldier froze when Japanese girl said and did the unthinkable. August 14th, 1945. Okinawa, Japanese-occupied territory. The rain hammered the tin roof of the makeshift detention compound like machine gun fire, a sound Sergeant Ezra Johnson had grown to hate during 3 years of island warfare. He stood at the entrance of the wire enclosure, his Springfield rifle slung across his shoulder, watching steam rise from the mud-slicked ground as the Pacific sun broke through the storm clouds. 27 Japanese women sat in rows inside the compound, their heads bowed, their prison uniforms soaked through. Enemy civilians. That's what the briefing officer had called them. Ezra had been told to guard them until transport arrived to relocate them to a permanent facility. 3 days, maybe 4. Simple duty after months of combat that had turned the island into a graveyard. Ezra's hands trembled slightly as he lit a cigarette. Not from fear. The shaking had started after Iwo Jima, after he'd watched his best friend Jimmy Henderson step on a mine that scattered him across 20 feet of black sand. The medics said it was battle fatigue. Ezra called it by its real name, the price of survival. He studied the women through the fence. They looked nothing like the propaganda posters back home, the ones showing fanged monsters in Japanese uniforms. These were mothers, daughters, teachers, thin, exhausted, defeated, but still the enemy. Still the people whose soldiers had tortured American prisoners, whose kamikaze pilots had crashed into American ships, whose empire had dragged the world into hell. A young woman near the front raised her eyes and met his gaze. She couldn't have been more than 25. Her face was gaunt, her cheekbones sharp beneath skin darkened by sun and deprivation. But her eyes held something Ezra hadn't expected to see. Not hatred, not fear, something else entirely. Recognition, maybe. The look of one survivor studying another. Ezra turned away and crushed his cigarette under his boot. Behind him, Sergeant Tom Williamson approached, carrying 2 canteens. Williamson was from Ohio, a farm boy who'd volunteered after Pearl Harbor. He'd fought beside Ezra since Guadalcanal, saved his life twice, and never once treated him different for being colored. In the segregated army of 1945, that counted for something. "Water detail," Williamson said, holding up the canteens. "Lieutenant Carter wants us to make sure they're hydrated. Geneva Convention and all that." Ezra took 1 canteen without comment. The Geneva Convention. A piece of paper written by men who'd never crouched in a foxhole while mortars rained down, never pulled a bayonet from a friend's chest, never watched whole companies disappear in artillery barrages. The Japanese hadn't worried much about the Geneva Convention at Bataan. 76,000 American and Filipino prisoners forced on a death march, 15,000 dead from starvation, disease, and execution. But orders were orders. Ezra unlocked the gate and stepped into the compound. The women shifted nervously, drawing back as if he carried plague. He understood that reaction. He'd seen what some soldiers did to enemy prisoners when officers weren't watching. He'd seen worse things done by the enemy. He approached the first row and held out the canteen. An elderly woman with silver hair reached for it with shaking hands. She drank deeply, water spilling down her chin, then passed it to the woman beside her. The young woman who'd met his gaze earlier was in the second row. When he offered her the canteen, she took it carefully, her fingers brushing his for just a moment. She whispered something in Japanese. 2 words he didn't understand, then bowed her head. Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today. Now back to the story. Don't mention it, Ezra muttered, though he knew she couldn't understand English any better than he understood Japanese. He finished the water rounds and locked the gate behind him. 3 days, maybe 4. Then they'd be someone else's problem. He could handle that. What Ezra didn't know, standing there in the August heat with rain still dripping from the roof, was that everything he believed about duty, about the enemy, about himself, was about to shatter like glass under a rifle butt. The young woman's name was Aiko Tanaka, and she was about to change his life. August 15th, 1945, 0600 hours. The sun rose over Okinawa like a copper coin dropped in blood-red water, casting long shadows across the detention compound where Ezra had spent another sleepless night on guard duty. His eyes burned from exhaustion and cigarette smoke. His back ached from sleeping on the wooden bench outside the wire. But sleep meant dreams, and dreams meant Iwo Jima, so he'd learned to stay awake. Lieutenant Carter arrived at dawn with news that changed everything. The war was over. Japan had surrendered. The radio announcement had come through at midnight, but Carter had waited until morning to tell the men. Emperor Hirohito himself had spoken to his people, accepting the Allied terms. After 4 years of brutal fighting across the Pacific, it was finished. Ezra felt nothing. No joy, no relief, just the same hollow numbness that had lived in his chest since Henderson died. Around him, other soldiers cheered and embraced. Williamson actually cried, great heaving sobs of relief. But Ezra just stood there, watching the women in the compound, wondering if they knew yet that their empire had fallen. By mid-morning, the celebration had faded into the grim reality of occupation duty. The women still needed guarding. The war might be over, but these were still enemy nationals. Protocol still applied. Carter assembled the guards and reminded them that the Geneva Convention mattered more now than ever. The world was watching how America treated the defeated. "These women are under our protection," Carter said, his voice firm. "Any man who forgets that answers to me. Understood?" The men nodded. Most meant it. A few, Ezra noticed, looked away. The incident happened at noon. Private Danny Thompson, a kid from Georgia who'd arrived 3 weeks earlier, was on gate duty when one of the Japanese women approached him. She was middle-aged, maybe 40, and she was pleading in broken English, gesturing toward the latrine area. Ezra, standing 50 feet away, couldn't hear the words but understood the situation. The woman needed medical attention. Feminine troubles, most likely. Thompson's face flushed red with embarrassment and anger. "Get back," Thompson shouted, raising his rifle. "Get the hell back." The woman persisted, desperation overcoming fear. She grabbed Thompson's sleeve. He shoved her hard. She fell backward into the mud, crying out as she landed. That's when Aiko Tanaka stepped forward. She moved between Thompson and the fallen woman, her hands raised, her voice calm but urgent. She spoke in Japanese, then switched to halting English. "Please, she is sick. Please, help." Thompson leveled his rifle at her chest. "I said get back, you Jap bitch." Ezra was moving before he realized it, his body operating on instinct honed by 3 years of keeping his squad alive. He crossed the distance in seconds and grabbed Thompson's rifle barrel, pushing it toward the ground. "Stand down, Private." Thompson's eyes were wild. "She touched me. Did you see? She put her goddamn hands on me." "I saw a sick woman asking for help," Ezra said quietly. "Now stand down before Lieutenant Carter sees you pointing a weapon at an unarmed prisoner." Thompson backed away, muttering curses. Ezra turned to Aiko, who was helping the fallen woman to her feet. Up close he could see that Aiko's hands were trembling, her breathing rapid. But she hadn't run. She'd stepped between Thompson's rifle and another human being. "You okay?" Ezra asked, knowing she probably couldn't understand. Aiko looked at him, those same eyes from yesterday, seeing through him somehow. She nodded once, then helped the other woman toward the latrine area. But before she turned away, she spoke again in that careful, broken English. "Thank you. For stopping." 3 words. Simple words. But they hit Ezra like artillery fire. She spoke English, at least some, which meant she'd understood every curse, every slur, every hateful word the guards had thrown at the prisoners over the past 2 days. She'd heard it all and stayed silent, protecting herself and the others by seeming ignorant. Ezra watched her walk away, supporting the sick woman, moving with a dignity that prison uniforms and barbed wire couldn't diminish. Something uncomfortable twisted in his chest, a feeling he couldn't name. Not quite guilt, not quite shame. Something worse. Recognition. He'd seen that same dignity before, worn by colored men and women back home who faced hatred with quiet strength, who survived by seeming invisible, by playing dumb, by protecting each other when the law wouldn't. The enemy, he'd been taught, were monsters, animals, less than human. But the woman walking away from him through the mud, bearing another woman's weight on her thin shoulders, was none of those things. She was human, completely, undeniably human. And that changed everything. August 16th, 1945. The heat pressed down on Okinawa like a physical weight, turning the detention compound into an oven. Ezra sat in the shade of the guard shack, cleaning his rifle for the 3rd time that day. His hands moved automatically, field stripping the weapon, wiping each part, reassembling it with practiced efficiency. But his mind was elsewhere, replaying yesterday's incident over and over like a broken record. Williamson sat beside him, writing a letter home to his wife in Ohio. "You believe it?" he said without looking up. "War's actually over. I'll be home by Christmas. Might even make it by Thanksgiving." Ezra didn't respond. He was watching Aiko through the wire. She sat with a group of women in the far corner of the compound, using a stick to scratch letters in the dirt. Teaching, he realized. Even here, even now, she was teaching. "You've been quiet," Williamson continued, setting down his pen. "More quiet than usual, I mean. Something eating at you?" "Just tired." "Bull, I've known you 3 years, Ezra. You're chewing on something." Ezra slid the bolt back into his rifle with a metallic click. "That woman yesterday, the one who stepped between Thompson and the sick prisoner, she speaks English." "So?" "So I've been thinking about what she's heard, what they've all heard, the things we've said, the things we've called them." Williamson was quiet for a moment. "They're the enemy, Ezra. Hell, they were the enemy. Past tense now, I guess. But you can't lose sleep over words when their soldiers were cutting the ears off our boys." "They're soldiers," Ezra repeated. "Not them. These are school teachers and shop clerks, farmers' wives. They didn't torture anybody." "How do you know? How do you know what they did before we captured them?" Ezra had no answer for that. He went back to cleaning his rifle, though it was already spotless. The truth was more complicated than Williamson's question. Ezra had grown up in Birmingham, Alabama, where white men asked the same questions about colored folks. How do you know they're not dangerous? How do you know they're not criminals? How do you know they're not animals? Guilt by association. Guilt by birth. Guilt by skin color. He'd spent his whole life being judged by what other people assumed about him, by what white folks believed colored men were capable of. And now here he was, doing the same thing to these Japanese women, seeing them not as individuals, but as representatives of everything their nation had done. It made him sick. At 1400 hours, Lieutenant Carter called Ezra to the command tent. The lieutenant sat behind a folding table covered with papers and maps, his uniform dark with sweat despite the shade. "Sergeant Johnson, I need you to organize a work detail. The women need to dig proper latrines. Current facilities aren't adequate for long-term detention." "How long-term are we talking, sir?" "Could be weeks now. The surrender's complicated everything. Transport's backed up. Supply lines are a mess. We're stuck with these prisoners until somebody figures out where to send them." "Weeks." Ezra nodded slowly. "I'll handle it, sir." "And Ezra?" Carter's voice softened. "I saw what you did yesterday with Private Thompson. That was good work. We need more of that. Things are going to get tense now that the fighting's stopped. Some of these men, they need the war to keep going. They need an enemy to hate. Don't let them find one behind our wire." Ezra saluted and left the tent. He stood outside for a moment, letting Carter's words sink in. Some men need an enemy to hate. Was he one of those men? Had he been using his hatred of the Japanese to avoid thinking about everything else, all the death and horror and pointlessness of 3 years of war? He walked to the compound gate and unlocked it. 27 pairs of eyes watched him enter. He could feel their fear like humidity in the air. To them, he was the enemy, the conqueror. The man with the gun and the keys, he cleared his throat. "We need to dig latrines, better facilities. I need volunteers." Silence. None of them moved. Then Aiko stood up. She said something in Japanese to the other women, her voice calm and steady. 3 more women stood, then 5 more, then all of them. Aiko approached Ezra, moving slowly, carefully. "We help," she said in that careful English. "You show where?" Ezra met her eyes and saw something there he recognized. Not defiance exactly, not submission either, just determination, the will to survive, to endure, to maintain dignity even in degradation. "This way," he said quietly. As he led them to the latrine area, shovels distributed from the supply shed, Ezra felt the weight of every assumption he'd carried into this compound. The enemy wasn't supposed to volunteer, wasn't supposed to help, wasn't supposed to look at him with understanding instead of hate. But here they were, these women he'd been taught to despise, digging latrines in the August heat without complaint, working together, helping each other, being human. Ezra stood guard while they worked, his rifle heavy in his hands, and wondered what the hell he was supposed to believe anymore. August 18th, 1945. The compound settled into an uneasy routine. Morning roll call at 0600. Breakfast rations at 0700. Work details through the heat of the day. Dinner at 1800 hours. Lights out at 2100. The rhythm of occupation. Neither peace nor war, but something suspended between the two. Ezra found himself volunteering for extra shifts. Better than lying awake in his bunk, better than sitting in the mess hall listening to the other men talk about going home. Home. Birmingham, Alabama. A place that felt more foreign to him now than this burned-out island halfway around the world. What was waiting for him there? The same segregated water fountains, the same back-of-the-bus existence, the same lynch mobs that had killed his cousin in 1938 for looking at a white woman wrong. He'd fought for a country that treated him like a second-class citizen. He'd bled for freedom he'd never actually tasted. The irony wasn't lost on him. Here he was, guarding Japanese prisoners, and in some ways they had more dignity than he'd ever been granted back home. On the 4th day, something small happened that Ezra would remember for the rest of his life. He was distributing water canteens when he dropped his notebook. It fell through the wire fence into the compound, landing in the dirt near where Aiko sat with 2 other women. Before Ezra could retrieve it, Aiko picked it up and brushed off the dust. She looked at the pages, her eyes scanning the words he'd written. Ezra froze. The notebook contained letters he'd written but never sent. Letters to Henderson's mother explaining how her son had died. Letters to his own mother trying to explain what the war had done to him. Private thoughts he'd never intended for anyone to read. Aiko closed the notebook carefully and brought it to the fence. She held it out to him, her expression unreadable. "You write very beautiful," she said softly. "About your friend, about home. You read it. Not a question, an accusation. Yes, I am sorry, but it was open." She paused, choosing words carefully. "Your friend. He sounds like good man, like my brother. He died too, in Manchuria. I understand your sadness." Ezra took the notebook, his hands shaking. "Your brother was a soldier?" "Yes. Army. He wrote to me about his friends, about missing home, about fear." She met his eyes. "Same as you write. Same words, different language, same heart." She turned and walked back to her place in the compound, leaving Ezra standing there with his notebook and his shattered assumptions. The enemy had a brother. The enemy wrote letters home. The enemy felt fear and love and loss. The enemy was just like him. That afternoon, Sergeant Williamson brought news that hit the camp like a grenade. A transport ship would arrive in 1 week to relocate the prisoners, but the destination wasn't a permanent camp. It was repatriation. They were going home to Japan. The women received the news with mixed reactions. Some cried with relief. Others looked terrified. Ezra understood why. Japan was destroyed. Cities burned to ash. Millions dead or displaced. They were going home to ruins. He found himself thinking about Aiko's brother, killed in Manchuria. Did she have other family? Parents? Children? What was she returning to? That evening, as the sun set over the Pacific, Ezra approached the fence where Aiko sat alone. He'd brought something from his own rations. A chocolate bar, the kind the army distributed to troops. Luxury in a war zone. "Here," he said, pushing it through the wire. "For you." Aiko looked at the chocolate like it was a live grenade. "Why?" "Because I'm sorry, about your brother, about this whole goddamn war." She took the chocolate slowly, her fingers trembling. "Thank you. But you should not be sorry. You did not start war, neither did I. Neither did my brother or your friend. We are all victims of men in power who wanted more power." The wisdom in those words, coming from a woman in a prison uniform, struck Ezra like a physical blow. She was right. He'd been fighting for 3 years. But who had he really been fighting? Not these women. Not Aiko's brother. Not even most of the Japanese soldiers he'd killed. He'd been fighting for old men in Washington and Tokyo who sent young men to die for abstractions like empire and honor and national pride. "You speak very good English," Ezra said, sitting down on his side of the fence. "Where'd you learn?" "University. I was teacher before war. English literature. Shakespeare, Dickens, Hemingway." A small, sad smile crossed her face. "I taught Japanese students to love American books. Then our countries went to war. Strange world." "Strange world?" Ezra echoed. They sat in silence for a while, separated by wire and nationality, and all the death between them. But in that moment, the distance seemed smaller than it had before. "What will you do?" Ezra asked. "When you go home?" "Rebuild. If anything left to rebuild. Teach again, maybe. Help children learn that war is not glorious. That enemy is just word invented to make killing easier." She looked at him. "What will you do?" "I don't know. Go home, I guess. Birmingham. Try to forget." "You will not forget." No one forgets, but maybe you remember different. Maybe you remember that enemy had brother who died, sister who mourned, mother who cried. Maybe that memory makes you different person. Ezra nodded slowly. The sun had set completely now, leaving them in darkness broken only by the guard tower's spotlight. Tomorrow would bring the same routine: roll call, rations, work details. But something had shifted. Some wall had cracked. The enemy had a name now, a story, a brother who died far from home. Just like him. August 21st, 1945. 3 days before the transport ship arrived. The compound had grown tense with anticipation and fear. The women knew they were going home, but home had become a foreign country. Radio reports described devastation beyond comprehension. Tokyo incinerated by firebombs, Hiroshima and Nagasaki obliterated by weapons that defied understanding. Millions homeless, starving, wandering through ruins. Ezra had stopped sleeping entirely. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Henderson's death. But now he saw something else too. Aiko's brother, dying in Manchuria. Faceless but real, another young man bleeding out in the mud for nothing. The nightmares had expanded to include enemy dead, their faces mixing with American faces until Ezra couldn't tell the difference anymore. At 0400 hours, he gave up on sleep and walked to the compound. The moon was nearly full, casting silver light across the wire and the huddled forms of sleeping women. A guard should wake them for trying to sleep outside the barracks. But it was too hot inside, and they weren't hurting anyone. So Ezra let them be. He lit a cigarette and leaned against the fence post. His hands had stopped shaking. The battle fatigue symptoms were fading, replaced by something else. Not peace exactly, but a kind of tired acceptance. The war was over. He'd survived. Now came the harder part, learning to live with what he'd done and seen. You do not sleep. Ezra turned to find Aiko standing on the other side of the fence. She wore the same prison uniform, thin and stained, but she'd somehow maintained a dignity that no uniform could diminish. Her hair was tied back with a strip of cloth. Her face was gaunt from inadequate rations, but her eyes were clear and alert. Neither do you, Ezra said. I think too much. About home, about what I find there. She paused. About what war does to people. The killing, yes, but also the after. The living with memory. You afraid of going back? Yes, very afraid. My city was Osaka. Radio says Osaka is gone. Burned. My parents' house, my school, my students' homes, all gone. I returned to ashes. She looked at him. But staying here is also frightening. We are enemy to you. Some soldiers, they do not follow Geneva Convention when officers not looking. We know this. We fear this. Ezra felt shame burn in his throat. She was right. There had been incidents. Not in this compound, not under Carter's watch, but he'd heard stories from other camps. Prisoners beaten, women assaulted, the kinds of atrocities that winners commit because they can. Because history is written by victors and losers don't get to tell their side. Not all of us are like that, he said quietly. I know. You are not. Sergeant Williamson is not. Lieutenant Carter is not. But some are, and we never know which is which until too late. She sat down on her side of the fence, mirroring his position. You showed me your heart in notebook. You are a good man who saw terrible things. War makes good men do bad things, yes? Makes them forget they are good? Ezra couldn't speak. The words stuck in his throat like broken glass. She understood. This enemy woman, this prisoner, understood what the war had done to him better than his own officers, better than his fellow soldiers, maybe better than he understood himself. I killed people, he said finally. Japanese soldiers. I did my duty. But I also hated. I wanted revenge for Henderson, For all the American boys who died. I wanted you to suffer like we suffered. That's what I felt when I first guarded this compound. I wanted you to hurt. And now I don't know what I feel. You're supposed to be the enemy, but you're just people. Scared people going home to ruins. Just like I'm a scared person trying to figure out how to live in a world that hates me for my skin color, while demanding I die for a country that won't let me drink from the same water fountain as white folks. Aiko was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was soft but firm. We are same. You and me. Both born into world that decides our worth before we speak. You are judged by color. I am judged by nation. We both fight in war we did not choose. We both lose people we love. We both try to keep dignity when world tries to take it away. She reached through the fence, her hand extended toward him. Ezra stared at it. In that moment, everything came down to a simple choice. He could be the good soldier, maintain distance, remember she was the enemy. Or he could be human. He took her hand. Her fingers were calloused and thin, worn down by hard labor and inadequate food. But her grip was strong. They sat like that, hands clasped through the wire, two people who should have been enemies finding something else. Not friendship exactly, not yet, but recognition, understanding, the beginning of something that defied military regulations and racial prejudice, and 3 years of propaganda telling them to hate each other. When you go home, Ezra said, what will you tell people about Americans? I will tell them truth. Some Americans are cruel, but some are kind. Some see enemy, but some see human being. I will tell them about soldier who shared chocolate, who stopped violence, who treated us with dignity when he did not have to. She squeezed his hand gently. What will you tell people about Japanese? Same thing. The truth. They sat until dawn broke over the Pacific, until the light forced them to release hands and return to their roles. Guard and prisoner, American and Japanese, enemy and enemy. But something had changed in those hours of darkness. Some wall had crumbled completely. As Ezra walked back to the guard shack, Sergeant Williamson met him with coffee and a knowing look. You're playing with fire, Ezra. Fraternizing with prisoners. Carter finds out, you'll be on report. Let him report me. War's over. What's he going to do, send me to combat? Williamson shook his head. It's not about combat anymore. It's about going home. Don't mess that up by getting court-martialed for breaking regulations. But Ezra didn't care about regulations anymore. He'd spent 3 years following orders that got good men killed. He'd followed regulations that told him to hate people he'd never met. He'd been a good soldier in a bad war. Now the war was over, and he was tired of being a soldier. He was ready to be human again. August 22nd, 1945. Morning brought news. That complicated everything. The transport ship had been delayed. Mechanical problems in Manila meant the women would remain in the compound for at least another week, possibly 2. Lieutenant Carter delivered the information during morning briefing, his voice tight with concern. Extended detention meant increased risk. Boredom bred contempt, and contempt bred violence. Ezra watched the women receive the news through translators. Some cried. Others simply stared at the ground. Aiko stood apart from the group, her face unreadable, but Ezra could see the tension in her shoulders. Another week of uncertainty. Another week of fear. That afternoon, Sergeant Williamson did something that surprised everyone. He brought his lunch to the compound fence and sat down to eat where the women could see him. Not unusual in itself, except he'd brought extra rations. Bread, cheese, canned peaches, luxuries that even American soldiers rarely saw. He divided them carefully and passed portions through the wire to the nearest women. Private Thompson, watching from the guard tower, shouted down, "Williamson, what the hell are you doing? Those are enemy rations going to the enemy. Williamson didn't even look up. War's over, Thompson. These are just hungry people now. The women accepted the food with trembling hands and deep bows of gratitude. They divided Williamson's portions further, making sure everyone got a taste. One woman started crying over a piece of bread no bigger than Ezra's thumb, bread she was sharing with 3 others. Ezra felt something crack open in his chest watching that. These weren't monsters. They were people who cried over bread, people who shared when they had nothing, people who said thank you to the men guarding them. Later that day, Ezra found himself at the fence again. He'd stopped pretending it was coincidence. Aiko was teaching English to a group of younger women, using the dirt as her blackboard. She wrote words with a stick. Simple words. Water. Food. Please. Thank you. Words they might need to survive in occupied Japan. You're a good teacher, Ezra said when she paused. Aiko looked up, surprised. You watch for long time? Just a few minutes. You taught before the war? Yes, 7 years. English literature at girls' school in Osaka. I loved teaching, loved books, loved watching students understand new ideas. She smiled sadly. I had 42 students, all different. Some smart, some struggling, but all trying, all growing. I wonder now if they are alive, if school's still standing, if any books survived the fires. What did you teach them? What books? American books, Hemingway, Steinbeck. Your country's stories about struggle and survival, about people fighting against unfair world. My students loved The Grapes of Wrath. They understood the Joad family's suffering. Japanese farmers suffer too. Poverty, hunger, powerful men who take everything. Same story, different country. Ezra sat down on his side of the fence. That's what you meant last night, about us being the same. Not just you and me, all poor people, all people without power. We're all fighting the same fight against people who don't care if we live or die. Yes, exactly yes. War is trick. Make poor people hate other poor people. Make us kill each other so we forget who is real enemy. Real enemy is man who starts war but never fights in it. Man who gets rich while we get dead. The clarity of her words hit Ezra like artillery. She was right. Henderson had died poor. Ezra had fought poor. The black soldiers in his unit were all poor boys from Alabama and Mississippi and Georgia, fighting for a country that kept them poor. And across the ocean, Japanese soldiers, also poor, also sent to die by rich men in Tokyo. My students wrote essays about this, Aiko continued, about how ordinary people everywhere want same things: food, safety, family, peace. But powerful men want different things: territory, resources, glory. So they send us to kill each other for things that benefit only them. She paused. I was arrested for teaching this. Government said I was spreading dangerous ideas, anti-patriotic. They sent me to camp for re-education. Then your army came and I became prisoner again. Different flag, same wire fence. You were a prisoner before we captured you? Yes, for 2 months, for teaching students to think, for reading them American books about fighting injustice. She laughed bitterly. Ironic, yes? Arrested by Japan for teaching American ideas, then captured by America and treated as enemy. Maybe problem is not which country. Maybe problem is that any country can become prison when powerful men feel threatened by thinking people. Ezra had no response to that. He'd never thought about it in those terms. But she was right. He'd grown up in Birmingham, where black people were arrested for demanding basic rights, for sitting at the wrong lunch counter, for drinking from the wrong water fountain, for thinking they deserved to be treated as human beings. The sun was setting, casting orange light across the compound. Soon he'd have to return to his post. But for now he sat with Aiko separated by wire, and felt closer to her than to most of the men he'd fought beside for 3 years. Thank you, Aiko said quietly. for listening, for seeing me as person, not just enemy. This is rare gift. Thank you for teaching me, Ezra replied, for showing me what I couldn't see before. As he walked back to the guard shack, Ezra understood something profound. The war had taken 3 years of his life. But this woman, this enemy, was giving him something back. She was teaching him how to be human again. August 23, 1945. The compound settled into a fragile routine as the extended detention stretched into its second week. The women worked during the day on various tasks: cleaning, repairing buildings, maintaining the grounds, light labor by military standards, but hard for people weakened by inadequate rations and trauma. Ezra watched them work with growing respect. They helped each other constantly, supporting those who struggled, sharing water, taking breaks together so no one faced exhaustion alone. He found himself looking for small ways to help. When Aiko's work group was assigned to carry supplies from the warehouse, Ezra made sure the heaviest boxes went to the stronger women. When the afternoon sun became brutal, he authorized extra water breaks. When one woman collapsed from heat exhaustion, he personally carried her to the shade and brought the camp medic. These were small acts, easily justified as proper treatment of prisoners. But Ezra knew the truth. He was helping because he wanted to help, because he saw them as people who deserved kindness. The other prisoners noticed. He could feel their watchful eyes tracking his movements, testing whether his kindness was real or performance, wondering if he could be trusted. He didn't blame them for the suspicion. They'd learned the hard way that kindness from soldiers often came with terrible prices. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, they began to relax around him. Women who had flinched when he approached now made eye contact. Some even offered small smiles. One elderly woman bowed to him after he helped her carry water buckets. Another whispered, "Thank you," in careful English. Aiko noticed, too. "They talk about you," she told him during an evening conversation at the fence. "They say you are different from other guards. Kinder, more human. Hana, my friend, she says you remind her of her son. He was soldier too. Died at Guadalcanal." Her son was at Guadalcanal? Ezra felt ice in his stomach. He'd fought at Guadalcanal. 6th-month campaign of pure hell. He'd killed Japanese soldiers there. Maybe dozens, maybe more. He'd stopped counting after Iwo Jima. Yes, she received notice in 1943. He was 20 years old, her only child. Aiko paused. She does not hate you for fighting there. She understands soldiers do not choose where they fight. She hates the men who sent her son to die, same men who sent you. Ezra couldn't speak. He was sitting 3 feet from a woman whose son he might have killed, and she didn't hate him. She saw him as someone's son, too, someone's brother, someone's friend. The weight of that understanding nearly crushed him. The next morning, Ezra brought something from his personal belongings. A small bar of soap. Real soap, not the harsh military issue kind. He'd been saving it for months, a luxury sent from home. He wrapped it in paper and found a moment when Aiko was alone. "Here," he said, pushing it through the fence. "For you and the other women. I know it's not much." Aiko took the soap like it was made of gold, her eyes filled with tears. "This is very much, more than you know. We have not had real soap since before war. To be clean again, to feel human again. This is precious gift." "It's just soap." "No, it is dignity. It is you, saying we deserve to be clean, to be comfortable, to be human. Small things are not small when you have nothing." She shared the soap that evening. Ezra watched from a distance as the women passed it carefully between them, each taking a turn to wash. They laughed. Actually laughed, a sound that had been absent from the compound since he'd arrived. The sound of women remembering what it felt like to be clean, to be cared for, to be treated with basic decency. Sergeant Williamson joined Ezra at the fence. "You're getting attached." "Maybe." "That's dangerous. For you and for them. You know what happens when guards get too friendly with prisoners. Command doesn't like it. Other soldiers don't like it. And when the prisoners leave, you're left with memories that'll haunt you." "I'm already haunted, Williamson. Might as well be haunted by something good instead of just death." Williamson nodded slowly. "Fair enough. Just be careful. Thompson's watching you. He doesn't like what you're doing. Says you're being soft. Says you're forgetting they're the enemy." "The war's over. There is no enemy anymore." "Try telling Thompson that." That night, Ezra lay awake thinking about soap, about how something so simple could mean so much to people who had nothing, about how easy it was to give dignity and how cruel it was to withhold it, about how the war had taught him to see people as targets, as threats, as problems to eliminate, and how Aiko was teaching him to see people as people again. He thought about Hana Watanabe, who'd lost her son at Guadalcanal, about all the mothers on both sides who'd received those terrible letters, about how grief didn't care about nationality or ideology or propaganda. Grief was grief. Loss was loss. Pain was pain, and kindness, Ezra realized, was the only weapon against it. Small acts, soap, water, bread, respect. These wouldn't bring back the dead or undo the war. But they were something. They were human connection in a world that had forgotten what connection meant. As he finally drifted toward sleep, Ezra made a decision. He would keep helping. Keep showing kindness. Keep treating these women as people. Even if it meant risking Thompson's anger or Command's disapproval, or his own heart breaking when they left. Because the alternative was becoming the monster he'd been trained to fight. August 25th, 1945. Tensions in the compound were rising like temperature before a storm. The extended detention was wearing on everyone. The women grew more anxious each day, knowing home awaited but unable to reach it. The guards grew more irritable, tired of occupation duty, eager to go home themselves. Small conflicts erupted over nothing. A misunderstood order, a perceived insult, a moment of accidental contact between guard and prisoner. Private Thompson was the worst. He'd grown increasingly hostile toward the prisoners, especially after witnessing Ezra's acts of kindness. Thompson represented everything Ezra had been trying to move past: the casual cruelty, the dehumanization, the need to have an enemy to hate. "You're making us all look soft," Thompson told Ezra during guard change. "These Japs think they can manipulate us. Smile pretty, say thank you, and we'll forget what they did. Forget Pearl Harbor, forget Bataan, forget every American boy they tortured and killed." "These women didn't attack Pearl Harbor," Ezra replied calmly. "They didn't torture anybody. They're school teachers and farmers' wives. Civilians. They're all the same. They all supported the war. They all cheered when their soldiers killed ours. Don't let one pretty girl with sad eyes make you forget that." Ezra bit back his response. Fighting with Thompson wouldn't help anyone. But the accusation stung because it touched something true. Yes, he cared about Aiko. Yes, he saw her differently than he saw the others. But that didn't make his compassion wrong. It made him human. That afternoon, Aiko told him more about her life before the war. They sat at their usual spot by the fence, the late summer heat pressing down like a physical weight. She spoke slowly, carefully choosing English words, occasionally switching to Japanese when she couldn't find the right phrase. "My brother, the one who died in Manchuria, his name was Kenji. He was 3 years younger than me. Very gentle person, loved animals, wanted to be veterinarian." Her voice was soft, distant with memory. "He did not want to be soldier, but government conscripted him. No choice. He wrote letters saying he was afraid. saying war was not glorious like propaganda claimed, saying he saw terrible things, did terrible things, because refusing orders meant execution. Sounds like he was a good man stuck in a bad situation. Yes, like you, like all soldiers. Good men forced to do bad things by men who never do bad things themselves because they are too important to fight. She paused. Kenji wrote in his last letter that he met Chinese farmer. Old man, maybe 70 years old. Japanese soldiers came to take his rice. He protested. Officer ordered Kenji to shoot him. Kenji refused. Officer shot farmer himself, then beat Kenji unconscious for insubordination. Kenji wrote that he wished officer had shot him instead. That would have been better than living with shame of watching innocent man die. Ezra listened, his throat tight. He understood that shame, understood the weight of witnessing atrocity and being powerless to stop it. He'd carried similar shame since Henderson's death, since all the deaths. 2 weeks after that letter we received notice. Kenji killed in action. But I know truth. My brother did not die fighting. He died because he was good man in evil situation, because he refused to become monster. Maybe another soldier shot him. Maybe officer killed him for being too soft. I will never know. I'm sorry about your brother. Thank you. I am sorry about your friend. Henderson, yes? The one you wrote about in Notebook. He sounded like good man too. They sat in silence for a while. The compound was quiet except for the buzz of insects and the distant sound of other guards talking. Ezra found himself thinking about Birmingham, about growing up black in the South, about understanding from a young age that he was seen as less than human by people who had power over him. You asked me once about going home, Ezra said. About Birmingham. I didn't tell you the whole truth. I'm not sure I want to go back. Why not? Because in Birmingham, I'm not seen as hero who fought for his country. I'm seen as colored boy who needs to remember his place. I'll go back to segregated buses and whites-only lunch counters and the constant reminder that I'm not really American. Not the way white soldiers are American. I fought the same war, bled the same blood. But I'll come home to different country than they do. Aiko nodded slowly. I understand this. In Japan, women are also less than. We cannot vote, cannot own property, cannot make decisions about our own lives. I became teacher because my father was progressive man who believed women should be educated. But many people said this was wrong, said women should only be wives and mothers, said my teaching was improper. She looked at him directly. You and I, we are both people our countries say are less than. Maybe this is why we understand each other. Both outsiders, both fighting for dignity in a world that denies it. The parallel struck Ezra hard. He'd never thought about it that way. But she was right. The same forces that oppressed Black Americans oppressed women in Japan. The same need for hierarchy, for someone to be better than someone else, for power to flow downward and never up. Different countries, different systems, same cruelty. What happens after we go home? Aiko asked. Will you fight? Will you demand change? I don't know. Fighting is exhausting. I've been fighting my whole life, fighting the war, fighting prejudice, fighting to survive. Maybe I just want to rest. But if good people only rest, bad people keep winning. Kenji taught me this. He said silence is agreement. If we see wrong and say nothing, we are helping wrong continue. Ezra knew she was right. But knowing didn't make it easier. Change required energy. He wasn't sure he had anymore. The war had drained him, left him empty. As if sensing his despair, Aiko reached through the fence and briefly touched his hand. We help each other. This is how we survive. You are not alone. Those simple words, spoken by an enemy prisoner in a detention compound on a forgotten island, gave Ezra something he'd been missing since Henderson died. Hope. Not hope that everything would be okay, but hope that maybe, with help, with connection, With people like Aiko reminding him of his humanity, he could keep fighting. Not with guns this time, with conviction. August 27th, 1945, 10:30 in the morning. The scream cut through the compound like a knife. Ezra was checking supply inventories when he heard it. A woman's voice, high and terrified, followed by shouting in Japanese. He dropped his clipboard and ran toward the commotion, his hand instinctively reaching for his sidearm. Inside the compound, 2 women were fighting. Actually fighting, fists and nails and fury. Other prisoners formed a circle around them, some trying to intervene, others simply watching in shock. Ezra recognized one of the fighters, a young woman named Yuki who'd been increasingly agitated over the past few days. The other was older, maybe 40, someone Ezra had never paid much attention to. He unlocked the gate and entered, shouting for them to stop. They didn't hear him or didn't care. Yuki had the older woman by the hair, screaming in Japanese. The older woman fought back, landing blows to Yuki's face and stomach. Blood ran from both their noses. That's when Aiko stepped between them. Ezra saw it happen as if in slow motion, Aiko moving forward with her hands raised, trying to separate the fighters. Yuki, blind with rage, swinging wildly, her fist catching Aiko square in the temple, Aiko crumpling to the ground like a puppet with cut strings. Everything after that happened fast. Ezra was through the crowd in seconds, kneeling beside Aiko. Her eyes were closed, blood trickling from a cut above her eyebrow. Her breathing was shallow but steady. Around him, the other women had finally separated the fighters, holding them apart while they continued to scream at each other. "Aiko," Ezra said, touching her shoulder gently. "Aiko, can you hear me?" Her eyes fluttered open, confused, unfocused. She tried to sit up and immediately swayed. Ezra caught her before she fell again. "Stay down, you're hurt." Sergeant Williamson appeared beside him. "What the hell happened?" "Fight broke out. She tried to stop it and got hit. We need the medic, now." "Ezra, you know the rules. Medic treats Americans first. Prisoners wait." "I don't care about the rules. Get the medic or I'll carry her to the medical tent myself." Williamson stared at him for a long moment, then nodded. "I'll get him. But Carter's going to hear about this. You're breaking protocol." "Let him hear." While Williamson ran for the medic, Ezra stayed with Aiko. She was more alert now, trying to speak. "I am okay, just dizzy. Please, do not make trouble for yourself because of me. You took a hard hit protecting someone else. That's not nothing." Yuki and Mrs. Tanaka were fighting about food. Yuki says Mrs. Tanaka steals more than her share. Mrs. Tanaka says Yuki is a liar. Stupid fight. Meaningless. But we are all scared and hungry and tired. Small things become big things. The medic arrived, a young corporal named Stevens, who'd seen too much combat to be bothered by protocol debates. He examined Aiko quickly, checking her pupils, testing her responses. "Possible concussion. She needs rest and observation. I'll set up a cot in the medical tent." "She's a prisoner," Lieutenant Carter said, appearing suddenly. His face was hard. "Prisoners are treated in the compound, not in American medical facilities." "Sir, she needs proper care. She could have serious injury." "Then treat her here. That's an order, Sergeant." Ezra felt something snap inside him. Not anger exactly, something colder, more determined. He looked at Carter and made a choice that would change everything. "No, sir." The word hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot. "Excuse me?" "No, sir. I'm taking her to the medical tent. She's hurt. She needs care. I don't care what the protocol says. It's wrong, and I won't follow it." Carter's face went red. Around them, other soldiers had gathered, watching the confrontation. This was a direct refusal of orders. Grounds for court-martial. Ezra knew it and didn't care. Sergeant Johnson, you will stand down and return to your post immediately. That is a direct order. I will stand down after she receives proper medical care, not before. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Carter surprised everyone. Fine. Corporal Stevens, take her to the medical tent. Treat her properly. And Sergeant Johnson, you will report to my office at 1400 hours. We'll discuss your insubordination then. Ezra helped Aiko to her feet. She was unsteady, leaning heavily on him. As they walked toward the medical tent, she whispered, "You should not have done this. You will be punished." "I know. Why? Why risk yourself for me?" Ezra didn't answer right away. They reached the tent, and Stevens helped Aiko onto a cot. As the medic began cleaning her wound, Ezra stood at the entrance, watching her. This woman who'd taught him to see clearly again, who'd reminded him that the enemy was just another name for people he didn't know yet, who'd shown him that compassion wasn't weakness but the hardest kind of strength. "Because it was the right thing to do," he said finally. "Because I've followed wrong orders long enough. Because you're not the enemy. You never were." Aiko's eyes filled with tears. She nodded once, understanding everything he couldn't say. Then Stevens ushered Ezra out so he could work. Outside the tent, Williamson was waiting. "You know what you just did?" "Yeah." "Was it worth it?" Ezra thought about Aiko stepping between two fighting women despite the danger. Thought about her teaching English in the dirt. Thought about her brother who refused to shoot an old man. Thought about every act of courage and compassion he'd witnessed in this compound over the past 2 weeks. "Yeah," he said. "It was worth it." Whatever came next, whatever punishment Carter handed down, Ezra had finally done something he could be proud of. He'd chosen mercy over duty, humanity over protocol, compassion over fear. He'd chosen right over easy. And that choice, he realized, was the first step toward becoming the man he wanted to be. August 27th, 1945. 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Ezra stood, outside Lieutenant Carter's office, his uniform soaked with sweat that had nothing to do with the Pacific heat. Through the thin walls of the tent, he could hear voices. Carter was in there with someone. The conversation was heated. After 10 minutes, the tent flap opened. Major William Bradford stepped out, a man Ezra had never seen before. He was older, maybe 50, with silver hair and a face carved from granite. His uniform bore combat ribbons from the First World War. This was someone who'd been fighting longer than Ezra had been alive. "Sergeant Johnson," Bradford said, his voice carrying the flat accent of New England. "Come with me." They walked past Carter's tent to another area of the camp. Bradford didn't speak until they were far from other soldiers. Then he stopped and turned to face Ezra directly. "I'm the new commanding officer for this detention facility. Arrived 2 hours ago. Lieutenant Carter briefed me on the situation. Your insubordination. Your unauthorized movement of a prisoner to American medical facilities. Your repeated violations of protocol regarding prisoner interaction." Ezra stood at attention, waiting for the axe to fall. "I should court-martial you," Bradford continued. "By regulation, I should have you arrested immediately. What you did this morning was a direct refusal of orders. In wartime, that's a shooting offense." "Yes, sir." "But the war is over, and I didn't spend 30 years in this man's army learning to follow stupid orders blindly." Bradford's face softened slightly. "Tell me why you did it, and don't give me the official answer. Tell me the truth." Ezra chose his words carefully. "Sir, that woman stepped between 2 fighters to stop violence. She got hurt protecting someone weaker. When I saw her lying there bleeding, I couldn't follow protocol that would deny her proper care. It felt wrong. Maybe I am wrong. Maybe I've lost perspective after 3 years of combat. But I couldn't do it, sir. I couldn't stand there and let her suffer when we had the means to help." Bradford nodded slowly. "You're not wrong, Sergeant. The protocol is wrong. It was written by men who see prisoners as problems, not people. But changing protocol takes time. What you did this morning was insubordinate, but it was also right. Sometimes those two things are the same. He paused. However, right or not, I can't let direct refusal of orders go unpunished. Other soldiers are watching. If I ignore this, discipline collapses. I understand, sir. No, I don't think you do. I'm not punishing you for helping that woman. I'm punishing you for how you did it. You should have come to me first, should have requested permission to move her, should have worked within the system instead of against it. The outcome would have been the same, but you would have kept your career intact. Ezra felt something deflate inside him. Bradford was right. He'd been so focused on doing the right thing that he'd forgotten there were right ways to do right things. His defiance of Carter had been emotionally satisfying, but strategically stupid. I'm putting you on report, Bradford said. 2 weeks extra duty. You'll report to the compound at 0500 for additional guard shifts. Consider yourself lucky it's not worse. Carter wanted you arrested. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me yet. There's more. Bradford's face grew harder. The transport ship arrives in 4 days. These women will be repatriated to Japan. When they leave, your contact with prisoners ends. No letters, no visits, no communication of any kind. You will return to normal duties and forget you ever knew their names. Is that clear? 4 days. Ezra felt the number hit him like a punch. 4 more days with Aiko. 4 more conversations. 4 more chances to learn from her. Then nothing. Is that clear, Sergeant? Yes, sir. Good. Dismissed. Ezra saluted and walked away, his mind churning. 4 days wasn't enough. He'd barely begun to understand what Aiko was teaching him, barely begun to process his own transformation. But the Army didn't care about personal growth or philosophical revelations. The Army cared about moving prisoners and closing facilities and getting soldiers home. He went to check on Aiko at the medical tent. Corporal Stevens was finishing with another patient. She's resting. Mild concussion, nothing serious. She'll be back in the compound tomorrow. Can I see her? 5 minutes, no more. Aiko was lying on a cot near the back of the tent, her head wrapped in clean bandages. Her eyes were closed, but they opened when Ezra approached. You came, she said softly. Had to make sure you were okay. I am okay. Head hurts, but I am okay. She struggled to sit up. Ezra helped her, arranging pillows behind her back. What happened with Officer? Are you in trouble? Some, extra duty. Could have been worse. I am sorry, this is my fault. No, this is my choice, my consequence. Ezra pulled up a stool and sat beside her cot. The transport ship arrives in 4 days. You'll be going home. Aiko's expression was complicated. Relief mixed with fear. Hope mixed with dread. 4 days. So little time. Yeah. They sat in silence for a moment. Outside the tent, the compound continued its daily routine. Guards changing shifts, prisoners working, life moving forward despite everything. Thank you, Aiko said finally, for helping me today, for risking yourself. In all my life, no one has done such thing for me, especially not someone from enemy nation. You're not my enemy. You never were. But I was. For 3 years, I was. You killed my countrymen. I supported war that killed yours. We were enemies, Ezra. That is truth. But somehow, in this terrible place, we became something else, something I do not have words for in English or Japanese. Ezra understood. They'd become friends despite everything that should have kept them apart. Despite nationality and history and all the reasons they should hate each other. They'd found something human and real in the middle of destruction. 4 days, he said quietly. We'll make them count. Yes, we will make them count. Stevens appeared and gestured that time was up. Ezra stood to leave, but Aiko reached out and caught his hand. Whatever happens after I leave, Remember what we learned here. Remember that enemy is just person you have not talked to yet. Remember that kindness is stronger than hate. Remember me. I will, I promise. As Ezra walked back to his quarters, the sun was setting over Okinawa. 4 more days of this strange peace they'd found. 4 more chances to talk and learn and be human together. Then separation. Then memory. But memory, Ezra was learning, could be powerful. Memory of Aiko's courage, her wisdom, her humanity would stay with him long after she was gone, would guide him through whatever came next. 4 days to prepare for a lifetime of remembering. August 29th, 1945, 5 o'clock in the morning. The compound was still dark when Ezra heard